So in this video, we are going to be talking about these and specifically what all the numbers on your camera lens mean. So if you've been looking at lenses online, or maybe you already have your lens and you just don't understand what all these numbers actually mean, then stick around because this is the perfect video for you. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly what the numbers mean and you'll know how your lens is going to perform. So let's start with the first number that you can see on your lens, which is the kind of big number with the mm after it. Now, this number refers to the focal length, which simply put is just how much of the scene you are going to be able to see when you look through the viewfinder. So a larger number will give you a telephoto view, which simply means that when you look through the viewfinder, everything will seem closer than the naked eye. If you have a wide angle lens, that means when you look through the viewfinder, everything will seem further away. Now here is an example of that for you. So here is a 35mm lens and here is an 85mm lens on the same camera. So you're sitting in the same position for both of these images. One was taken with a 35 and you can see more in the frame, and one was taken with the 85, and with that you can see that everything seems more zoomed in. It's pulled closer to the frame. So how can we tell just by looking at the focal length number how that lens is going to perform on our camera? So what the thing to kind of remember is that a 50mm lens is what is closest to the naked eye. So if you forget about a lens for a moment and you're just looking at a scene, roughly speaking, if you put a 50mm lens onto your full frame camera, it is going to give you roughly the same field of view. Now, it's not exact, but it's kind of close enough. So any number larger than 50mm, so 85, 135, 200mm, they are going to give you a more zoomed in look. So that larger the number, the more zoomed in it's going to appear. On the other hand, if you have a number that is less than 50mm, so 35mm, 24mm, 16mm, then that is going to give you a view that is wider than the naked eye. Now, so far, so kind of easy, but this all refers to a full frame camera. Now, if you are new to photography, the chances are you're not shooting with a full frame camera. You have a crop frame camera, and that gives a world of difference onto how your lenses are actually going to perform. That's because you have a different sensor size and it tends to magnify. So you can take this exact same 85mm lens, and if you pop that onto a crop frame camera, then it's going to behave differently. It's actually going to look more zoomed in. Exactly the same if I took a 35mm lens and pop that onto a crop frame camera, it's going to look more zoomed in than it would in a full frame. So how can we decide or see how a lens is going to perform if we have a crop frame camera? Well, it's very simple. What you need to do is take the focal length and then multiply that by a number. Now that's going to be 1.6 if you use Canon or 1.5 if you use Nikon. So for example, if you were using a 35mm lens on a crop frame camera, you're going to take 35, that's the focal length of the lens, and then you're going to multiply that by 1.5 if you use Canon or 1.6 if you use Nikon. And that will give you around 52. And what you will see then is closer to how the scene would look with a naked eye. So that 35mm becomes the equivalent of a 50mm. Let's do the same exercise again, this time with an 85mm lens. So let's take that 85mm and we're going to multiply that by 1.6. Let's assume that we have a Canon, and that's going to give us an equivalent focal length of 136. So our 85mm lens on a crop frame camera becomes the equivalent of 135mm. So it's going to seem a lot more zoomed in. So I do want you to bear that in mind when people are talking about focal length of lenses. If you have a crop frame camera, remember to do that multiplication by 1.5 or 1.6, and that will show you how that lens is going to perform on your camera. So that was just with one focal length. You may have one of these, which is a zoom lens, in which case you're going to have two different numbers separated by a dash. So this particular lens is a 16 to 35mm. So that means there is a range of focal lengths in this one lens. So when you just have the one number, like we have here, which is 85, it's got one fixed focal length. If you want to get closer or further back, you're going to have to move your feet. It's fixed at that focal length. Your zoom lens, because it has that two numbers, means you can move the zoom ring to zoom in and zoom out, and you can go through that whole range of focal lengths. The next area we are going to look at for the numbers on your lens is the aperture. Now, the aperture number is normally just written along the side here, and you'll see that it's got 1.18 on this particular lens, meaning that it has a maximum aperture of f1.8. Now, if I look again on my zoom lens that I have here, 16 to 35mm, you can see it's got 1 and then it's got to 2.8. The maximum aperture of this lens is f2.8. Now, on some lenses, you will actually see that you have two aperture numbers. And what that means is that you have a variable aperture lens. And you'll normally find that on your zoom lenses. And what that simply means is if you zoom in, you are going to get a different maximum aperture than if you were zoomed all the way out. So here's what I'd like you to do now. Go and grab your lens or have a look at the one online if you haven't got one yet. And in the comments below, let me know what the focal length is. And if you're using a crop frame camera, tell me what the equivalent focal length is and let me know what your maximum aperture is. It's a great little exercise just to make sure that you understood everything in this video. Now, I've actually got an extra little freebie for you that I think you'll love. You can go and download my Which Lens Kickstarter guide, and in that you'll get loads of image examples using different focal lengths so you can see what each one brings to the table. Plus, you'll get some suggestions on which best lenses or focal lengths you can use for different types of shots. So you can grab that. The link is below in the description. Now, as always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit that like button below, and be sure to subscribe. There are new videos every single week, so to make sure you are the first to know when the next video comes out, hit that red subscribe button and then the little notification bell that pops up just after it. As always, thank you so much for watching and for being here, and I will see you soon.